When the demolition crew arrived at Lincoln Elementary on March 15, 2024, they expected to find empty classrooms and old desks. They didn't expect to find 23 children's backpacks from 1975, perfectly preserved in a sealed basement room that wasn't supposed to exist. Mike Torres had been demolishing buildings for 12 years, but he'd never seen anything like what waited beneath Lincoln Elementary. The school had been abandoned since 2009, its hallways silent, its windows boarded shut. The city council had finally voted to tear it down, make room for a new shopping complex. Just another day's work until his sledgehammer broke through the basement floor and revealed something impossible. The basement wasn't on any blueprints. Mike checked twice, pulling out the faded architectural plans from 1962 when the school was first built. According to every official document, Lincoln Elementary had a foundation, a first floor, and a second floor. No basement, no underground storage, nothing. But there it was, a concrete room, 12 feet by 20, hidden beneath decades of accumulated debris. And inside that room, 23 children's backpacks sat in perfect rows, as if someone had carefully arranged them for inspection. Mike's first thought was that someone had been storing old lost and found items. Schools accumulated that kind of thing over the years. But as he descended into the hidden room with his flashlight, the details began to unnerve him. The backpacks weren't dusty. They weren't moldy or deteriorated despite being underground for nearly 50 years. They looked fresh. Each backpack had a name tag, handwritten in the careful cursive of elementary school children. Emma Rodriguez, Tommy Chen, Sarah Williams, Lisa Park. Names that sounded normal, everyday, but names that would soon prove to be ghosts. Mike photographed everything before calling his supervisor. By noon, the police had arrived. By evening, the discovery had reached the local newspaper. By the following week, it had become national news. Detective Maria Santos was assigned to the case. She was a methodical woman in her 40s, someone who preferred facts over speculation, evidence over theory. But the Lincoln Elementary discovery challenged everything she thought she understood about logic. The first question was obvious. Who were these children? Santos pulled records from the Lincoln Elementary archives. Searching for student enrollment from 1975, she found class rosters, attendance records, and graduation lists. But none of the names on the backpacks appeared in any official documentation. Emma Rodriguez, according to every database Santos could access, had never attended Lincoln Elementary. Neither had Tommy Chen, Sarah Williams, or any of the other 20 children whose belongings sat in that impossible basement room. More disturbing was what Santos found inside the backpacks themselves. Homework assignments dated October 1975, completed but never turned in. Lunch boxes with sandwiches that should have rotted decades ago, but looked like they'd been packed that morning, and photographs, glass photos showing children who didn't exist in any official record, standing in classrooms that weren't part of Lincoln Elementary's known layout. Santos expanded her investigation, reaching out to former Lincoln Elementary staff members who had worked there in 1975. Most were retired, some had passed away, but she managed to locate 3 former teachers and a janitor who had been employed. During that period, their responses were identical and deeply unsettling. They remembered the children. Margaret Foster had been a 3rd-grade teacher at Lincoln Elementary for 37 years, before retiring in 1998. When Santos showed her the photographs from the backpacks, Margaret's face went pale. "Oh my goodness," Margaret whispered, her hands trembling as she held one of the class photos. "That's Emma Rodriguez. She sat in the front row, always asked the most thoughtful questions. And Tommy Chen, he was such a sweet boy, always helped other students with their math homework." Santos leaned forward. "Mrs. Foster, I need you to understand something. These children aren't in any of the school's official records. There's no documentation that they ever attended Lincoln Elementary." Margaret's confusion was genuine. "That's impossible. I taught these children. I remember their faces, their personalities, their families. Emma's mother brought homemade cookies to every school event. Tommy's father was a mechanic who volunteered to fix the playground equipment. But when Santos pressed for more specific details, addresses, parent names, siblings, Margaret's memories became fuzzy, incomplete. She could remember the children clearly, but everything around them seemed to exist in a kind of fog. The same pattern emerged with the other former staff members. They all remembered the children from the photographs, could describe their personalities and behaviors, but couldn't provide any concrete details about their families or backgrounds. Santos decided to investigate the basement room itself more thoroughly. She brought in a team of forensic archaeologists, specialists who could analyze the space for clues about its construction and purpose. What they found deepened the mystery. The room had been built at the same time as the rest of the school in 1962, but it had been deliberately omitted from all architectural plans. The construction techniques and materials were consistent with the era, ruling out the possibility that it had been added later. More puzzling were the modifications inside the room. The walls had been soundproofed with materials that were advanced. For 1962, there were vents that connected to the main school's heating system, suggesting the room was meant to be habitable. And in one corner, they found something that made Santos's blood run cold, a small intercom system built into the wall with wires that led upstairs to what had been the principal's office. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the lead forensic archaeologist, pulled Santos aside after the third day of excavation. "Detective, this wasn't just a storage room," Dr. Vasquez said quietly. "This was designed to hold people, children, specifically, the dimensions, the soundproofing, the ventilation system. Someone built this space to contain kids, and they wanted to be able to monitor them from upstairs." Santos felt sick. How long could someone survive down there with the ventilation system? Indefinitely. As long as someone provided food and water. But detective, Dr. Vasquez hesitated. "We found something else. Scratch marks on the walls. Small ones, the height a child would make. And they're not random. They're tally marks." Someone was counting days. The investigation took a darker turn. Santos obtained a warrant to search the school district's archived records from 1975, looking for any unusual incidents or reports from that time period. What she found was a pattern of missing documentation. October 1975 was a gap in the records. Attendance sheets, administrative memos, and even the principal's daily logs from that month were missing from the archives. Not lost, deliberately removed. The file folders were still there, labeled and organized, but the contents had been taken out. Santos tracked down Harold Zimmerman, who had been the principal of Lincoln Elementary in 1975. At 86, Harold's memory wasn't what it used to be, but when Santos mentioned the basement discovery, something shifted in his expression. "I was wondering when someone would finally find that room," Harold said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. Santos set down her coffee cup. "Mr. Zimmerman, are you saying you knew about the basement?" Harold nodded slowly. "I knew about it. I was ordered to use it, and I've regretted following those orders every day for the past 49 years. The story Harold told was almost impossible to believe, but it explained everything. In October 1975, Lincoln Elementary had been selected for a special education pilot program by the State Education Department. The program was supposed to identify children with behavioral issues and provide them with intensive intervention to help them succeed in regular classrooms. 23 children had been selected for the program, children who were described as disruptive, antisocial, or unable to integrate with their peers. They were removed from their regular classes and placed in the basement room for what was supposed to be concentrated learning sessions. "The state officials told me it would only be for a few weeks," Harold explained, his hands shaking as he spoke. "They said the children needed to be isolated from distractions, that they would receive specialized attention from qualified professionals. But the professionals never came. The children were brought to the basement room on October 3rd, 1975, and that was the last time Harold saw them. I went down to check on them after the first day." Harold continued. "The room was empty. I asked the state officials where the children had been taken, and they told me the program had been relocated to a different facility. They said the children were receiving excellent care and would be returned to their families once the intervention was complete." Harold had never questioned the explanation. The children's names were removed from the school records, their files, transferred to the state education department. Their families were told that the children had been moved to a special boarding school. For their own benefit, I trusted the authorities, Harold said, tears streaming down his face. I thought I was helping those children. I never imagined. Santos asked the obvious question, what happened to the families? Didn't they demand to see their children? Harold's answer was perhaps the most disturbing part of the entire story. According to him, the families had been told that contact with their children would interfere with the treatment process. They were assured that the children were safe and happy, and that they would be returned home once the program was complete. But the children never came home, and after a few months, the families stopped asking about them. Santos decided to investigate this claim. She searched for records of the families Harold had mentioned: the Rodriguezes, the Chens, the Williamses, and the others. What she found was another impossibility. None of the families existed in any official records from 1975. No birth certificates, no tax records, no employment histories. It was as if 23 families had simply vanished from all documentation, leaving behind only the memories of school staff and the belongings of their children. Dr. Vasquez called Santos back to the basement for one final discovery. Hidden behind a false wall, the archaeological team had found something that changed everything: a filing cabinet filled with documents from the State Education Department's special program. The documents revealed the truth about what had happened. In October 1975, the behavioral intervention program was not what it appeared to be. It was a psychological experiment designed to test methods of memory modification and social integration. The children hadn't been taken to another facility. They had been kept in the basement room for the entire month of October, subjected to various forms of sensory deprivation and psychological conditioning. The goal, according to the documents, was to eliminate problematic behavioral patterns and create more compliant students. But something had gone wrong. According to the final report, dated November 1, 1975, the experimental subjects had experienced severe psychological deterioration and had become unresponsive to intervention. The recommendation was to terminate the program and implement containment protocol. The last entry in the file was a single sentence: subjects relocated to permanent facility. All records to be archived under classified designation. Santos stared at the documents, trying to process what she was reading. 23 children had been used as test subjects in a psychological experiment, and when the experiment failed, they had been relocated to a permanent facility. The family's memories had been somehow altered or suppressed. The school records had been scrubbed, and the entire incident had been buried. But the most chilling discovery was yet to come. At the bottom of the filing cabinet, Dr. Vasquez found a map. It showed the location of 3 other schools in the state that had been selected for similar pilot programs in the mid-1970s. Santos immediately contacted the authorities in those districts. Within a week, demolition crews at 2 of the schools had found identical basement rooms containing the belongings of children who didn't exist in any official records. The 3rd school, however, presented a different scenario. When investigators arrived at Oakwood Elementary, they found that the basement room was not empty. It contained the preserved remains of 14 children aged between 6 and 11, who had been dead for approximately 49 years. The Lincoln Elementary discovery had uncovered more than just a forgotten basement room. It had revealed a systematic program of child experimentation that had operated across multiple locations in the state during the 1970s. The children whose backpacks were found in the basement had not been relocated to permanent facilities. They had been eliminated when the experiments failed. But questions remained. How had the memories of staff members been preserved while official records were erased? Who had orchestrated such an elaborate cover-up? And most importantly, were there other sites still waiting to be discovered? Santos continued her investigation, but she often found herself thinking about Margaret Foster's words. When she looked at the photographs, "I taught these children. I remember their faces." In a world where official records could be altered or destroyed, sometimes human memory was the only thing that kept the truth alive. The children whose belongings were found in that impossible basement room had been erased from history, but they had not been forgotten. Their backpacks, preserved in that sealed room for nearly 50 years, were proof that they had existed. They had been real children with real names, real families, and real lives that had been stolen from them in the name of psychological research. The investigation into Lincoln Elementary would eventually lead to the exposure of a decades-long conspiracy involving state education officials, federal research programs, and experimental facilities that operated in the shadows of legitimate institutions. But for Santos, the case would always be about those 23 backpacks, arranged in perfect rows, waiting patiently to tell their story to someone who would listen. The basement room at Lincoln Elementary was demolished along with the rest of the building, but the memories of the children who had been imprisoned there lived on. Their names were carved into a memorial plaque that was installed at the site, ensuring that Emma Rodriguez, Tommy Chen, Sarah Williams, and the 20 other children would never be forgotten again. Sometimes the most important discoveries are the ones that should never have been buried in the first place.